Welcome to the Break Vape podcast. I am your host, Tami Ernst. If you are an overwhelmed mom struggling to quit vaping after trying everything in your power to quit, then you are in the right place, mama. Each week on the show, we analyze stress, vaping, and addiction from a place of zero self-judgment so that you can build up the skills you need to ditch your vapes for good. Are you ready? Let's get to work. Hi, Charlene. Thank you so much for joining us today to share your story about your son, Solomon. Can you please start off by telling us who you are and where you're from and why you're coming on the show today?
My name is Charlene Zorn. I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, and my 15-year-old stepson, Solomon, passed away on June 17th of this year from vaping.
Can you describe Solomon as a person?
He was a very loving, strong-willed child. He idolized his daddy and his brother, football and his Xbox. He was a very determined child. Knew what he liked, knew what he really did not like. He was a beautiful child.
You're such an amazing mama for coming on the show to share his story.
Thank you. It's worth it. If one person stops vaping after hearing me talk about our loss, it's worth all the suffering it causes.
Have you gotten to be able to spread the word at all?
I've done 4 or 5 interviews. Our school system has not been real welcoming. So far, I have not had the opportunity to speak in our school system, but I'm still fighting for that. But I've had a lot of people in our local community reach out to me. I've had people worldwide reach out to me after seeing some of the interviews I've done.
Yeah, that's important. I think that speaking in the school systems, it'll come. You know, I found your story. I was Googling EVALI, dangers of EVALI, recent stories that were coming up. And that's how I came across Solomon's story. And thank you so much for letting me connect with you on Facebook and reaching out on Messenger. And it hurts my heart to think about what happened with Solomon, but I'm so grateful to have you on the show today to share your story and to help spread the word to all the other parents that are out there listening. Did you ever know that Solomon was vaping, or could you speak to his relationship about vaping?
His father caught him with a vape once, probably 6-8 months before he got sick. Took the vape away from him, had a conversation with him about it, and we never had any indication after that point that he had vaped again. And his dad took it out of the house, made sure it wasn't even in the house, disposed of it at work so that it wasn't where he could access it. So until he got sick in March, we had no clue at all.
And was he quite young when you first found that he was vaping?
He was 14.
Oh.
He passed away at 15. He passed away. His birthday was a week and a half before he passed away. He had just turned 15.
Oh, goodness. So that leaves about a year, do you think?
From the best we can tell from talking to Solomon, he just finished his freshman year, and he had either started vaping with his friends at school the end of 7th grade, beginning of 8th grade, somewhere around there. So it wasn't very long. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't daily. It just was something that destroyed his body quickly and severely.
That is mind-blowingly fast. And it was he just started vaping, and about a year later started getting sick with those EVALI symptoms.
Correct. So in March, it appeared that he had a bad cough and cold. You know, after treating the normal bad cough and cold and then not clearing up, went to the family doctor who had treated him for bronchitis, assuming that's what it was. And it didn't clear up, went back to the family doctor, had another chest x-ray, had some blood work done. And the doctor knew there was an infection, but wasn't sure what it was. But he had him on antibiotics and steroids and inhalers. Nothing was clearing up. And then referred him to our pediatric pulmonary clinic here in town. And he went there the first time on April 21st. They did a pulmonary function test. She did allergy testing and did chest x-rays and immediately knew that it was from vaping.
I was very curious to ask that. When he was going through all of those testings and things, did they ask him about vaping? Is that common practice or?
So the doctors actually said to me recently that she now treats patients over the age of 10 differently. Every patient she sees over the age of 10, she speaks to that child and that parent about vaping and about the dangers of vaping because it's becoming so much more prevalent with the youth.
Yeah, 100%. It's an epidemic. During that time, so when Solomon started to have symptoms, what did those symptoms look like? So for any of the moms out there who are listening, if their kiddos maybe start to display some of these same combination of symptoms, what would we look for?
So what we initially saw was what looked like a bad cold and cough. But in hindsight, going backwards before that, he played football in 8th grade, played football this year, his freshman year, did not put nearly the effort into it. And he loved football, his whole world. He loved football. Did not nearly put the effort into it that he put into it last year. But now in hindsight, we think some of it was that he didn't have the lung capacity that he had a year ago to play football. Like he just was like, well, whatever kind of thing, didn't get a lot of playing time. His dad was like, Solomon, you got to try harder. You got to practice more. You got this, you that. And he was in the weight room all the time. The child was in the weight room, was in the gym every Saturday with his dad.
I saw a picture of him, a few pictures.
Did you see the video of him pushing the sled? I don't know where that is. Somewhere I might still have that. There's a video of him pushing the sled in the gym. He could push a couple 100 pounds on the sled in the gym, but as he got sicker, he couldn't do any of it. He got to the point where he couldn't walk from the house to the bus stop. That's how sick he got. At night, was coughing and wheezing and like gasping, like they were getting ready to do a sleep study because they thought he had sleep apnea. That he developed sleep apnea from the vaping.
Did they think it was sleep apnea before they considered his symptoms being EVALI?
No, not at all. He never had any signs when he was younger of sleep apnea at all. But as the EVALI got worse, he started snoring and snorting and that skipping breath kind of thing that people do with sleep apnea. He also had gained quite a bit of weight from all the steroids he was on. He gained about 30 pounds. He was a big boy anyway, so that did help.
Initially, when he started having something that looked like a bad cold with a lot of coughing and wheezing, I've heard of some other EVALI patients who have a lot of GI issues and distress or fever and, things I could kind of see how it would start off looking like a cold.
He did have some GI issues along the way that were about the same point as the EVALI issues where we were contributing those to all the medications, to the inhalers and the steroids and things like that. Because by the time he got to the pulmonologist, they started him on nebulizer treatment. So on top of using the inhaler on schedule and as a rescue inhaler, he was also taking nebulizer treatment several times a day. We were in the process of getting ready to get him evaluated by a cardiologist. He passed away on Saturday and was supposed to see the cardiologist the following Monday.
And at that time, did they still not know that it was linked to EVALI?
We've known since April. When he had seen the pulmonologist in April, we immediately knew. We immediately knew then.
Did they know because of chest x-rays or MRIs?
The chest x-ray, the pulmonary function test, speaking with him, and he was honest about it with the doctor. The one thing about Solomon is he wouldn't lie. So he might not always do everything right. No kid does, but he wouldn't lie if you asked him.
Mm-hmm. So when he talked to the doctors about vaping, had he quit already, or was it something that he still struggling with?
I don't know that we ever really got a clear answer when the last time he had used it was, because he had been sick for well over a month. By the time he had seen the pulmonologist, we don't think he'd been using it at all, because he really wasn't leaving the house at all, and he wasn't around his friends or any of those things.
So jumping back real quick, just to the topic of the EVALI and the x-rays, did they explain to you what the x-rays look like between the x-rays of someone who would have an illness versus EVALI?
Like the popcorn lungs, yes.
And then also with scarring on both of the lungs instead of just one, which would have been indicative of something like pneumonia.
He had scarring on both sides of his lungs. When he had a CAT scan, Tuesday before he passed away, he had a CAT scan, and there was fluid on both lungs, in the upper and lower parts of the lungs, as well as fluid around his heart. So by that point, he was in congestive heart failure, which 15-year-olds don't have. 15-year-olds don't suffer from congestive heart failure.
Right. 15-year-old, healthy, strong boys like Solomon.
Football who are in the gym, who rode his bike all over the neighborhood. Yeah, no, it's not normal. The
Did he ever
people,
talk to you about how he picked vaping up in the first place?
his friends, he told us that. So
Did
we
he?
were up in the mountains about 5 weeks before he passed away. Our daughter graduated from college and we were up for graduation, and he barely could walk up the steps in the stadium, like to get to the seats or walk down even. He got tired from that. Just didn't have the physical strength. He was just worn out.
Thank goodness that happened so fast.
It did.
You think, did he ever have any education around the fact about just how dangerous vaping could be?
I mean, they had a little information at school, but not much. So our school system last school year, if a kid got caught vaping at school, obviously they would take the vape away. They would put the kid in school suspension and allow them to do a online vaping education class, like as the punishment. Since last school year, North Carolina has passed what's called the Parents' Bill of Rights. So before the school can even discuss any of the dangers of vaping with your child, they have to notify you that your child has said to them, oh, I've been vaping, I need to quit, or whatever it is. So they can't do anything without the parent's permission. And that law covers many different things. Unfortunately, things like vaping education have now fallen under that umbrella.
So it sounds like then it's up to the parents really to speak to their kids about vaping.
Right. And so Solomon lived in a house with two parents who don't smoke, who don't vape. He never saw that in his surroundings. None of our other children, we have a large blended family. None of our other children vaped. So it wasn't that he saw those things from us.
Right. Like you said earlier, he just picked it up from his friends.
And it was a cool thing. When vaping first started, it was about people using vaping as a way to quit smoking. Children that are 15 years old now that are vaping, or 14 and 13 and 12, whatever, they aren't using that to quit vaping. They're using it because it tastes good. It tastes like jelly beans, or it tastes like cereal, or it tastes like whatever. But that's why they're using it. Feeling all those chemicals and those metals and the high dose of nicotine. It's horrible.
I remember when vaping was kind of coming into my bubble and coming on the scene, and almost everybody I knew just thought that it was vapor and that there was nothing wrong with it.
People still tell me there is no way that he died from vaping.
The first time we met and talked, you had told me about his death certificate and the cause of death. Can you speak to that for a minute?
The cause of death on his death certificate is vaping, the primary cause of death.
I would think that so many people and parents and kids and everyone out there would not even know that that is a thing, that that even exists, that they even have a code, a medical code for that.
Right? It's heart-wrenching.
It's like some of these kids, they don't even have a chance sometimes. I do think every kid should take responsibility for themselves. When you're a child and your brain is still developing and you're presented with a fruity flavored vape jam-packed full of really high levels of nicotine, and it is marketed to their faces, first of all, in flavor, in the packaging, right? The bright colors, the bright lights, all the things that they package up the vapes in. And then I have even heard that companies go and specifically target the youth on social media.
Well, you can buy a hoodie. So here's my hoodie. Guess I wore it for a reason today. I didn't realize it.
I've got Charlene on video. I can see her holding up her hoodie strap.
If you Google it, there are hoodies that the strings have vapes built into it. So to hide it. They have vapes that look like highlighter markers. They have vapes that look like all sorts of other things. So you hide it from your parents. So our oldest son of the three boys is a high school teacher. And the things that my son has told me in different ways he's caught kids vaping is crazy.
Does he see a lot of vaping then in the schools where he teaches?
They definitely said you go into the bathroom and it's like a puff of smoke, like a puff of vape if you walk into the student bathroom.
I've heard about a lot of schools now that it's so bad. What they're doing is they're having monitored restroom breaks. So the kids will all go out into the hallways together, and a teacher has to watch a kid go in one at a time and come out one at a time from a restroom. And that is an attempt, right, to try to crack down on it, is to try to really be in control of those times where kids have that kind of privacy where they can vape in a bathroom. But I don't think that's going to cut it.
Start with laws changing. It has to start with education. It has to target Mike Tyson and one of the wrestlers. There's one of the like WWE wrestlers who have their own vape companies.
Really?
Yes. And Mike Tyson definitely has it. And I cannot think of who the wrestler is. I don't want him to speak and say who it is. But when you have people like that these kids look up to promoting that, what are they supposed to think but that it's acceptable?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody should go through what Solomon went through. My child was on a ventilator from Friday morning until Saturday night when, as a family, we had to make a decision to take him off a ventilator because there was no chance of survival. None.
Oh, Charlene, I'm so sorry. I mean, my heart just hurts to hear you talk about that. And, I'm trying to find the right words. There's just no words. And I think every parent who is out there listening could really just take a moment of silence for Solomon.
One of the articles I read talked about there's a big percentage of high school student athletes vaping because they don't think it's dangerous compared to smoking a cigarette. They're not smelling like a cigarette and things like that. I mean, we all know what that nasty smell is.
Right. Lots of kids, they don't even gravitate towards cigarettes anymore. They think cigarettes are gross, but they think vapes are okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, happens a lot. If you don't mind, I do want to back up 1 second for the listeners who haven't heard your story before, just so that we can get the timeline and context. So what I heard you saying was that Solomon collapsed and went into the hospital and was removed from his medical support about 24 hours later.
So Friday morning, he collapsed at home and he'd been home by himself. His father got home and found him. He started chest compressions and rescue breaths, called the paramedics, and they got there. And by the time they got him stable enough to transport him to the hospital, they had worked on him for over 77 minutes. And he coded several times during those 77 minutes. So we transported him to the hospital and they did a CAT scan, put him straight into the ICU. And told us that the next 24 hours would be a tell-all. They tried to cool his body down to see if they could get some of the swelling off the brain, to see if there was any brain activity. And that was Friday morning, but I guess by that time it's maybe 11:30. I don't know. I know that when his dad called me and said that the paramedics were working on him, it was 10:27 on June 16th. I will never forget that time or the date. Ironically, it was also my mother's birthday, so it's got this weird combination thing in it now. So for 24 hours, they tried to cool his body down. His kidneys shut down during that time, had no urine output whatsoever. And they couldn't do any dialysis because they told us if they had tried to put him on dialysis, it would immediately kill him. So his kidneys had shut down. So obviously when they resuscitated him, they got his heart going, but that was all they got going. We sat there for 24 plus hours, watching them try everything, cooling his body down, all sorts of medications, and not a single sign of brain activity at all. Never blinked an eyelash, never twitched a finger, never tried to breathe over the vent. So Saturday morning, the doctor came in and spoke to our family and talked to us about, working towards removing him from the ventilator. And 3 of our other children came to town so they could say their goodbyes. So we kept him on the ventilator through the day, until everyone could get here and say their goodbyes. And we took him off the ventilator about 7:30 on Saturday evening. So we went about 6 hours, I guess, or so with him on a ventilator. And during that time, because the kidneys had shut down and his body was retaining so much fluid, he had gained even more weight than he had gotten from the steroids. His hands were huge. They had just swelled up. Everything had swelled up so much during that 36 hours. So by the point that we took him off the ventilator, he had no brain activity at all. His kidneys had shut down. He was in complete organ failure. Had he not collapsed when he did, the only way he would have survived was with a total heart and lung transplant. Oh. What are the odds of a 15-year-old getting a total heart and lung transplant?
And I think you had told me that he wanted to go into the military, like his daddy also.
Yep. His dad was a Marine.
Wanted to be a Marine.
Yep. That was one of his options, a gamer or a Marine or a football player. Those are kind of, the options we had looked that he wanted.
A gamer or a Marine.
Yeah, you know how 15-year-old boys are.
Yeah.
Dream big.
But wow, I mean, so either way, if he had lived past that, he would have had to have had those transplants and that would have changed his life forever.
It would have changed not just his life, it would have changed all of ours, you know. So ironically, we have a family friend who had a double lung transplant from COVID, which is also very rare. Very few people have gotten a double lung transplant after COVID. And he was a young, healthy 27-year-old and lived in a major city, was in St. Louis. And I think had he been anywhere else in the country besides in a large major city, he would have never gotten a double lung transplant after COVID. What I've seen him have to go through, you know, all the months on machines before he got to the point where he could have the double lung transplant, all the months that he was unconscious in a coma. Nobody wants that for a 27-year-old that got it from a deadly virus or for a 15-year-old that got it from vaping. Nobody wants to see anyone they love have to go through all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and we're not just talking about lungs. He needed lungs and a heart. So what are the odds of getting lungs and a heart? You know, you'd have to have that from the same casualty.
Yeah, the vaping, it just took over his body.
It destroyed his entire body.
Have you done any research, or do you know if the CDC is reporting deaths of EVALI so that they can keep track?
I've read some statistics.
I mentioned this because I did an episode recently, and to my research and knowledge, the CDC stopped keeping track of EVALI deaths a couple of years ago. There was COVID, and then it's like everybody stopped talking about vaping, and they haven't turned it back on. Meanwhile, there's people like your son, like Solomon, who are winding up on ventilators and passing away. And we don't know what's going on in the vaping world because we don't have the reflection of all of the numbers.
There's not enough tracking. I mean, I see lots of public service announcements. I see, you know, things on social media. Does your kid need help quitting vaping? You know, contact the health department, this and that. But there is not enough out there. And again, living in North Carolina and having something like the Parents' Bill of Rights, it doesn't help protect my child. I mean, I think that they think it is protecting our children and it's keeping the parents informed, but not really. How many kids are not going to a school nurse and saying, I need help quitting vaping? Or a girl going to a school and saying, I'm pregnant, I was assaulted, whatever it is, because they know the very first thing the school has to do is report to a parent. It is so ridiculous that if your child's name is William and they want to be called Billy, before your teacher can call your child Billy, they have to notify the parent. If they're going to call them anything besides what they are registered in school as, they have to notify the parent. We call Solomon Solly. So if he goes to school and tells his friends, call me Solly, they have to call and say, hey, is it okay? We have to notify you that he wants to be called Solly and not Solomon. Our older son is Alfred. He goes by AJ. So for him to go by AJ in school, they have to call us and say, hey, Alfred wants to go by AJ. Nobody's ever called him Alfred besides his birth certificate. Ever.
And is it just for a nickname, or is this for if they want to have their identity changed?
Anything besides what is on their birth certificate or how they're registered in school. I believe it was meant to target children's identity, you know, that were maybe identifying different than their birth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it started, but it captured everything under that umbrella. I mean, how many children do you know go by the name Alfred? They usually go by Al or Fred or something else. In AJ's situation, he's Alfred James, so he's always gone by AJ. You know, his dad is Alfred, he goes by Al.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from this is that in your state, with that in place, again, it's going to just have to circle back to the parents for now until anything could change. Really talking to their kids about vaping from a young age. I mean, elementary school age. My daughter's 8 years old, and I talked to her about vaping and smoking and alcohol, using her brain to make good decisions, and knowing that her brain is not developed enough yet. I tell her all the time, honey, your brain will be developed when you're about 23 years old.
And that's one of the bigger problems with vaping is that it affects the development of the brain. It increases the lack of concentration. It increases the lack of ability to focus, and it hampers the brain development. That's why there's a lot of things I've read talk about. That's why people that are younger are being affected so much more severely by vaping than people that are older because it's affecting their body development.
It affects their brain. And I think just the dopamine surge that the kids get from something like nicotine is just so powerful that comes from a vape. I mean, you see it in electronics. It's so powerful how kids get addicted to their iPads or their games.
Have you ever heard that phrase? Like they were comparing electronics to heroin and cocaine.
Sure.
Years ago, I read something where actually there were phrases that were in the names that were using like heroin and cocaine, the same type of addiction to electronics. And it's true. When you think about how many parents fight to get their kids off the Xbox or any of those things.
Do you remember that commercial that used to come on TV all the time about a brain being fried? And it would say, here's a regular egg. And it would show an egg in a frying pan that was first cracked. And it dropped into the pan gently. And it looks like a regular egg. And they would say, this is your brain. And then this egg completely frying and say, this is your brain on drugs. I think that they need to have a commercial like that says, these are your lungs, and cut forward and say, these are your lungs on vaping. Give the kids, a relatable visual, something that is really powerful, really educational, and spreads awareness about the dangers of vaping. They're just these innocent, growing little humans and minds. They don't have the forethought, they don't have the frontal lobe functioning, I think, to say no to vapes unless they're educated about it in the first place. It's just so easy when you're a kid and everybody else is doing it, just to go with the flow, especially if you don't think it's bad for you.
There's just too much temptation. When you have someone in the media promoting it, when you have something that tastes like gum and something that tastes like candy or cereal, I think most people talk to their kids about drugs, let's hope. But even that, the number of fentanyl deaths and drug deaths in general, is on the rise. It's all tied together. There was a study that I read that talked about kids that vape are more likely to start using drugs.
I read that as well. And do you think these kids would pick up a vape if it was black with a skull and crossbones on it and did not taste fruity and just tasted normal, like normal nicotine?
They're not supposed to have any flavor to it, and they still get it in. The laws have been passed. They can't have all those flavors, and they're all over the place. You can go into any vape store, and I had somebody call me a couple months ago saying that they had seen like a minor go into a vape store and get something. And so we gave them the phone number of where to call to file a complaint. I had someone reach out to me and tell me that their 5th grade stepchild was taking their biological mother's vapes, taking them to school and selling them. Child wasn't stupid enough to use it. Child was smart enough to deal it. And when the child got in trouble at school, all they did was take the vape away and call the parents, did nothing else. Really? The child was dealing in your school. Okay, they weren't dealing drugs or alcohol, but they were still dealing an illegal substance for a child. You didn't do anything about it.
So, Charlene, if there is one thing that you could say to a kid or a teenager listening to the show right now, maybe they're in the car with their parents and they're going to hear something about vaping and about Solomon, what would you share with them?
Nobody should suffer the way Solomon suffered. I don't want any child to miss getting their driver's permit. He just gotten old enough to get his driver's permit. North Carolina can get it at 15. He'll never get to drive. He'll never get to go to prom. It's Christmas. We don't know how to celebrate Christmas this year. Thanksgiving was hell. You don't want your parents to go through that hell of not having their kid there for a holiday. We're going through the first of everything without him here. We went to the opening football game for his JV team this year. Watching those kids come out onto the field without him, it was horrible. The first home varsity game, they honored him at the game. In their program, they did a whole page to honor him. Nobody wants that for their kid. I want to see you play football. I want to see the beautiful little girl cheer. I want to see her in her prom dress. Parents have such high hopes and aspirations for their children. None of them includes having to make the decision to take their 15-year-old off a ventilator. Every parent needs to talk to their kids over and over and over again.
Over and over and over again. I agree with that.
We talk to our kids about safe sex.
From elementary school to middle school to high school. If you have mentioned it, just go ahead and mention it again when they're a little bit older. And Stay consistent.
When you have your kids captured in the car and you're driving them to school or dropping them off at their friends, when you're sitting at your dinner table, and too many people don't eat dinner as a family, use that time to educate your children. Use that time to talk about all of those things, from abstinence to safe sex, to drugs, to alcohol, to smoking, to vaping, to going to college. It's not about just doing the best you can do. It's striving to be the best you possibly can be. Part of that is being healthy.
Just at the basics too. Part of being the best version of yourself ever is just saying no. And I think kids, they're so inherently very curious. I get asked a lot, how do I talk to my child about vaping? I say, just start talking to your child about vaping. Just say, hey, I'm going to talk to you about vaping. This is
right.
What I know. It can cause disease. It's bad for you. It's deadly. It's not safe. That fruity flavor, it's called diacetyl. It's filled with chemicals.
And I think when you start talking about the metals that are in it, not just the chemicals, but actually talking about the aluminum, the tin, all of those things, and they hear it in those terms, because that word makes more sense to them than some chemical.
Yes. And visuals go a long way too. And all of those online, there's lots of representatives of pictures that have a vaping lung with that popcorn lung in it. Charlene, as we wrap up here, is there anything that you would like to say about Solomon that's really positive to help memorialize his memory? Anything you want to share?
So Solomon was the youngest of our combined children between us of 8. So he's a baby of 8 is enough. And a little spoiled because of it, obviously. Inherently was a very good kid. Stubborn, strong-willed, smart when he wanted to be smart. Just like any kid, he had so much potential in front of him. All of it's gone. Every bit of it is gone. He doesn't have the opportunity to go to college. He doesn't have the opportunity to learn to drive. I want everyone's kid to be able to do the things that my child has not been able to do. I don't want anyone to go to bed at night thinking, I'm not going to see my child tomorrow morning. Kiss and hug your child and say, I heard about this boy named Solomon that was 15 that died from vaping. I don't want to go through what his family went through. And it's about teaching everyone about living a healthy lifestyle across the board. Talk to your kids about vaping. Talk to your kids about every danger that's out there. And I know that, for the most part, these kids think we're nagging. We're keeping them alive. I'd much rather my child be mad as hell at me and be alive than not be here.
And when you're a child or anyone, you don't know what you don't know. And they'll learn from parents. They'll learn from massive education.
Yes.
I think you're such a strong mama for spreading the word and talk about Solomon and share your story. I really appreciate you being here today, Charlene.
Thank you.
I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll talk to you a little bit later. For everybody listening, thank you so much for joining in today. Please pray for Charlene and her peace throughout the holidays coming up, and for Solomon. And if you're not a prayer, or Charlene, you're not a prayer, then maybe just send some good vibes.
Everyone needs prayers and good vibes. No matter what your belief is. In this world right now, we all need prayers and good vibes.
Amen to that. Okay, Charlene, thank you again so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like what was offered in today's show and want even more support, head over to www.breakvapes.com and schedule your free strategy session to discover exactly how my proven system can help you ditch your vapes for good. Bye for now.